Are you a leader navigating burnout, doubt, or growth? Welcome to the Ripple Effect Leadership Podcast, where intentional leadership creates lasting impact. Hi, I'm Jen Brown with my co-host Hugo Rodriguez, and we're diving into real leadership stories and practical insights to help you lead with clarity, courage, and connection, because we believe great leadership creates positive ripples at work and in life. Hi, I'm Jen Brown, a certified life and leadership coach with Journey of Grace Coaching, with over 20 years of experience as a Foreign Service Officer in the U.S. Department of State, where I had the privilege to work with my good friend and colleague, Hugo Rodriguez. Hugo, over to you.
Thank you, Jen. As Jen said, my name is Hugo Rodriguez. I am a 25-year veteran of the State Department. I currently work as both a leadership coach and a professor of practice in leadership. Now, you may be wondering why two former diplomats are getting together to talk about leadership. Well, diplomacy is a people business, and we spent the majority of our careers learning how to work closely and productively with people, and especially in the leadership context. And so we decided we would get together, share some of the things we learned, have these discussions around some of the thorny issues of leadership. And so, Jen, what are we going to talk about today?
We are talking about a topic that is really difficult for many, many leaders. And I know it's been difficult for me in my journey as well. This is the ripple of having difficult personnel conversations. And why do I say ripple? It is a ripple because when we don't have these conversations, the impact spills out into our team and the team morale suffers. And so why do we avoid this hard stuff, right? Well, it's because it's uncomfortable. And then we're already busy and we feel we don't have time to have these difficult conversations. And maybe that one little thing wasn't so big of a deal. But when we look at the impact over time, not having these conversations is more costly. And so let's talk about some of the impact here of having difficult conversations. 69% of managers say they are uncomfortable communicating with employees. And that comes from a Harris poll. Wow, 69% of managers do not feel comfortable communicating with their employees. 87% of leaders are avoiding difficult conversations entirely. That is almost 90% of our leaders out there not addressing the personnel issues that have an impact on our entire team. And so why does that matter? Well, that matters because maybe an employee doesn't realize where the gap is in the growth. Maybe the employee does and doesn't care. Maybe the rest of the team is feeling resentment because so-and-so is not doing his or her work and they're picking up the slack. And so, Hugo, I know this has been an issue, a topic that you have addressed throughout your career. How do we start in preparing to have these difficult conversations?
Thank you, Jen. Well, let's just start by framing some of the kinds of difficult conversations we're talking about, right? So it is very often either kind of performance related, where someone isn't delivering results or isn't carrying the load they need to carry on the team. And that is clearly visible to everybody else on the team who must carry that person's load for them. Or they're exhibiting some behaviors at work that are disruptive to the good work of everybody else, right? So the conversations that the leader needs to have with these people, with this person, they're complicated, right? How do you tell someone they're not measuring up, or that the behaviors that they're exhibiting are detrimental or destructive to the team, right? Tough conversations. What I have learned, and this has been a long journey for me, I can very clearly remember those first times I had to sit down with someone and address counterproductive behaviors. What I have learned, first of all, is that the groundwork for these conversations being effective actually starts all the way back on the first day you meet your team.
Mm.
When you are first getting to know people, right, you have to be starting to build a foundation of trust with them. Okay. You and I have talked about one-on-one conversations and how important it is to demonstrate your investment in your team and, give them the time and the space so that they can get to know you and you can get to know them and you can demonstrate that you are, you are invested in their growth. You want to give the time and effort to help them develop professionally. So important, because if your employee recognizes that you care, recognizes that you are invested in them, when you have to have one of those difficult conversations, they're much more willing and they are able to hear it because they're coming from the context of this person cares about me. If they are bringing this to my attention, it's because they want me to improve. They're on my side, right? If you don't start that relationship by investing in that person, they never get the sense that you are there for them. When you have this conversation, they will block it out. They
Right.
will come up with all kinds of reasons why what you say that they find maybe hurtful or undermining their own sense of self, they're going to have a reason to bandage that over. They're going to say, who is this guy? Why should I listen to him? What does he know about me? He doesn't know anything about me. He doesn't care about me. He doesn't know that, I've got a reason for why I did the thing I did, or the way I behave, or why I can't carry the load that is expected of me. Right? There's an immediate um, impulse to protect yourself and block out that information that isn't aligned with how you see yourself. And so you'll come up with those excuses. Building trust early as a leader breaks down those barriers. So it is really important that you recognize it may never happen that in the course of this person's time working with you, that you ever have to have a hard conversation with them. But I can tell you, if you aren't building that trust, when you do, in those cases where you do have to have a hard conversation, it's going to fall flat because you can draw their attention to it, but they'll have a million reasons why they shouldn't listen to you.
Right. And I think what you're talking about is having the really hard conversations, right, where there's a gap of some sort in the workplace. And that goes back to what I'm about to say goes back to your point of building that relationship early, because when you have that relationship early on, you are communicating your expectations for the job, for the work, for the mission, and you are getting that feedback from the employee about where they are. So having that early expectation setting conversation, if you will, also starts to show where any gaps might be and resources to help the employee.
That's right. And the other thing I would say is the one-on-ones give you regular space to work on closing all of these gaps, right?
Yeah.
Nobody comes into the workplace perfect. Nobody knows everything at the outset. And so when I talk about, professional development, I'm talking about improving, right? Like, so it
Yeah.
might be improving your work skills. It might be improving your work habits, your timeliness, showing up on time for meetings. What is kind of appropriate language? Those are all the gaps you should be closing in, in a regular way and not waiting for it to become this big explosion of, wow, now we have to address this because this gap has exploded,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
like building trust and having regular one-on-one conversations and creating an environment in your office of psychological safety or fearlessness allows you to close gaps before they become big. But if you have one, and sometimes this happens where all of a sudden something just out of the ordinary explodes. Um, Having spent time investing in that person will allow them to be able to hear and know you're coming from a position of kindness, not harsh criticism, right?
Yeah.
that you are really there to try to help them be better and to try to help the whole team be better. And by the way, you're having those regular one-on-one conversations with everybody on the team.
Right.
And so they know you are investing in them. And that builds that confidence that, Hugo is going to address this because he's working with all of us together.
Right.
Right?
Right. So that's laying the groundwork for the ideal feedback scenario. Let's dive into when mistakes happen or when someone has something going on outside of work that maybe is impacting their work, whether it's them showing up to work or being on time or the quality of work, whatever that mistake, if you will, is, or that situation is. What do we do when those situations happen? Ideally, right? We've been having these one on ones, we've been working through, but then something happens and we as leaders know that we should, and I say should because there's an element of judgment to that, right? It's our responsibility to have the conversation. So I know in my experience, these are not fun conversations, but there are things that you can do. And I think that we all do learn over time to be able to make these conversations more um, engaging, if you will, and more prepared and more focused. And so the first thing that I know I've tried to focus on is getting clear on the facts, separating the person from the issue, and addressing the issue, the impact, where we fell short in a very timely manner. And so, what I mean by that is when something happens, not waiting weeks or months or even days, if possible, to address it, but being very timely on the spot with that feedback. Because then when we do that, right, we're calling it out in a way that's like, hey, I noticed this happened. Here's the thing, here's the impact. What happened? And asking questions for that. That said, I would not say have these conversations on a Friday afternoon, right? I mean, like the timing to that is not good, but being strategic in your timing is important. Another key that I have found in that preparation is writing down my notes so that I'm not going in trying to wing it. And as I'm writing down, I'm being more intentional on those facts, on the impact, and I'm keeping the language in a more neutral lane, right? Taking the emotion out of the situation. Another key tip I have learned over my career is that the human resources department is my friend, true partner in addressing difficult personnel situations. And so if someone is an entrepreneur or a solopreneur or a team lead, consulting with HR in whatever shape that looks like for you is really important because there may be legal implications here, right? So you have labor laws. There are other things we need to think about, and just making sure that we as leaders stay within the lanes of what we can say and how we should approach these conversations is really important, which goes back to then after the conversation. And I'm skipping over the conversation here for a moment because I know we're going to dive into that here with Hugo. Um, but after that conversation, taking those notes, taking what was said, and turning that into documentation and email back to the employee, copying human resources, having that record for the file so that if and when this becomes anything bigger, you have a chain of the documentation. And guess what? Yeah, that takes all of this preparation, and after work takes time and white space on your calendar to be thoughtful about what you are doing with it. This is not the Friday afternoon rush. So Hugo, I've shared a lot there. I'd love to get your feedback.
Yeah, you hit some really critical points, some really great points. I'll just go back to you mentioned briefly separating the like the behavior from the person, right? Like it is
Yeah,
important to say, I know this isn't who you are, but this is the way it came across, right? Because we immediately put up our defenses when something where we fell short is called to our attention. And so the more you can frame it such that it's not a personal indictment, but it was about the way a behavior showed up, is a little bit easier to hear. The other thing I would just underline is that, going in with good notes, maybe even practicing that conversation with someone you trust, like,
Yeah.
tomorrow at work, I have to have this tough conversation. Can I just run through the points with you? Hearing yourself say it will allow you to find the right words for the moment, right?
Yeah.
And you can never tell, like when you go into a conversation, it's like a poker table, right? They may flip flip up two, or they may flip a king. You don't know how they're going to respond. But if you have had the chance to practice, you're going to be more ready to say, oh, I hear you. And let me just say, this is how it came across. Also, to be prepared for them to turn it back on you and say, yeah, I did that because you did this, or you never told me this, or you did this. I understand. I hear you. There's room for me to grow, and I'm going to work on that as well. But this is really about you. So, right, like let's
Yeah.
gently move it back to, here are the things. It's not about you. It's about the way you came across, or it's about the way acted in this moment. It's not a personal indictment. It is the activity that you're focused on.
And
So
one,
those two things.
yeah, I love that. And I would add, because growth is a lifelong journey. And as I got into coaching, I learned the power of asking really open ended
Yeah,
questions in these difficult conversations. And so, what's going on? I noticed this. What's going on?
so good, so good, and I'm glad you mentioned that again. I saw that you did that, and it is so powerful because
Yeah.
again, it shows you're trying to learn, you're trying to help them grow. What's going on? What's behind this? So fantastic. Um,
And even asking them, how might you do this differently next time?
Perfect.
I
That's
will
fantastic.
say, as a mom of a teenage son, I have learned over the years that when I go in and I am hard, heavy handed with him, it does not work as much. But if I say, here's the behavior, what do you recommend your punishment be? What do you recommend the consequences be? Wow, that's a whole different conversation. So even a leader at home, you have difficult conversations with your kids, with your spouse, with your friends. How can you use open-ended questions in a way to get their feedback? And so when you have these conversations at home, at work, the key really that I have been finding through coaching is the power of these open-ended questions, really getting the person to lean into thinking, what is going on? How could I do this differently? What might the consequences be? How can I grow?
So fantastic. I absolutely love that. And I because I found the same thing, and it took a long time, but really, those they demonstrate your commitment to helping that person grow by being open to asking what's going on here. The last thing I want to say, and it's again underlining something you said, um, with that script that you go into the conversation with, that then becomes the follow up email that ensures that you're on the same page, right? Um, when you are the recipient of one of these conversations, when someone is telling you how you are not living up in some way, it is you're so busy kind of building those defensive walls that often you don't hear all the nuance, right?
Yeah.
Getting an email afterwards that says, "Thank you for coming to talk to me today. I just want to reiterate the point so that we're on the same page. These are the behaviors I saw, right? And these are the ways that they had impact, negative impact, or whatever. And here's what I heard you say, and here's what I believe we agreed on as next steps." or how you will, prevent these in the future, or what you're going to do, like your commitment. And here's my commitment, right? If you heard something different, please let me know. So that
So powerful.
now you've got kind of clean communication. Again, like you said, great thing to put in the file, great thing to share with HR. And if the behavior persists, you can pull it out and say, hey, on this date, you can see from the email below, we had an understanding. And I just need to say, I don't see you like stepping up to your end of the bargain on this. So now you've got all of that done. It all started with that clear script that you started with, the points you wanted to make. And it became then kind of a record that you could rely on, that they could rely on, and a shared sense of understanding. So thank you for raising that. Those are really best practices and things that I did throughout my career.
Yeah, I learned the hard way of not having the documentation after an initial conversation or two. And so, again, we learn by doing. And so,
Yeah.
investing that time beforehand to prepare and then after as that buy-in conversation. They don't have to like it, but it is a shared conversation and ideally an agreement. And if it's not an agreement, HR again is your human resources is your partner.
You and I have both been through many of these, and I will just say they get easier over time, right? The first ones that
Yeah,
I did, I learned from. I learned because they didn't go great. I did what
right.
you said, I didn't go in with a script. And so it became this rambling back and forth conversation. And you did this, and who's to blame, and blah, blah, blah. Also, I hadn't built the trust beforehand. So it immediately became, confrontational as opposed to constructive, right? I will say in regard to that, another great practice is when you have to have these tough conversations, you and I sitting across from a desk is a physical environment of confrontation. Consider taking the person out of the office and maybe taking a walk around the block. If you are able to have that conversation without it being you against me, it's the two of us side by side going in a shared direction. There's a sense of we're working on this together, right? And we are moving somewhere. And I find that movement is helpful to keep the thought process going, walking and talking, but sharing the direction, working together to find a shared solution, right? Like I, I, I love to have those harder conversations walking with someone to a destination. I just find that is constructive. Not always possible, but a
Right.
good thing. Tell
But still
me,
taking, but to add though, I love still taking the person out of the office when possible. I would
yeah,
also add in there, setting the expectation up front. Hey, I'm going to take some notes and send you a follow-up just so that I capture what we're talking about
I
here
love
today.
that. Yeah,
Because it's
absolutely.
disarming if the person doesn't know that you'll be sending an email, or if they see you writing, they might think, I need to take my own notes here and be prepared for all of that because people's reactions are different. So communicating up front what to expect is always helpful in a way to at least manage expectations.
Yeah, and I like starting that email with thank you for
Right.
being open to this conversation. Thank you for taking the time with me, right? Because you're on a shared project,
Yeah.
right? We're all trying to get better, and we're working together towards that end. So, um, thanking them for being present and open to that conversation, even though it was a hard conversation. I think that's great.
Right.
You had started talking about kind of how do you um, how do you deal with the emotional impact? Because it's hard for the person that's receiving that message. It's hard for you giving that message. So, what are the practices you
Yeah.
have are like that help you deal with it when you have to have one of these hard conversations with one of your employees?
Actually, I would say the practices I learned from having these hard conversations have informed how I even approach my coaching sessions because it is being centered, being mindful beforehand, creating that space for me to reflect on how do I want to show up as a leader? How do I want to show empathy and grace, as well as here are the takeaways we need to address, right? So it's not just being soft, but it is being intentional in how I deliver the expectations and listening. How can I use silence as a way for the employee to share?
Oh, yeah.
And I
So
would
important.
also say, again, yeah, it really is. It's that prep work that really gives us the outcome here. If we are rushed going in, if we have meetings beforehand and then meetings right after, we're not in the mindset. So, how we block that time on our calendar is so important. I would also say then after, right? Yes, we need the time to document our notes and type everything up and do all that, but give yourself at least 15 minutes to decompress after that conversation because you're processing and your body's like hearing and absorbing this feedback and the nerves that come with these hard conversations. Honestly, when I look back to my own coaching journey and when I had a leadership coach, difficult personnel conversations were a part of that for me. And so if you're struggling or looking to grow in this area because it is hard, consider a coach, consider a mentor, talk to someone because there are other people who've been through this and can help you talk out loud, like Hugo was saying, practice what you're going to say, and then talk afterwards and have that decompression space
So
because
true.
honestly you've shared in a work relationship here, so you've taken on someone else's feelings whether you knew it or not.
I'm glad you pointed it out because it's true. As a coach, um, very often what I'm working on with my client is how to have these conversations, right? They're
Yeah,
struggling as a leader because something in their office is out of alignment. Somebody's, not behaving appropriately, or so there's a mismatch in skills and work required, whatever. And being able to express it to me and practice that. And as a coach, I can then say, okay, let me game it out with you. I will play the employee, and and I will, like I said, I'll deal different cards and say, all right, what do you say when I say this? Or what do you say when I say this? And it's the practice of it. The practice of it smooths it, lowers your anxiety around it, right? Like that's what I meant when I said these get easier over time because
yeah,
the more you do it, the lower your anxiety. The things, the ways to say things. You have the right words, and ideally, again, like I learned, starting by building trust long before you ever need to have this conversation means that the stakes are much lower. It
yeah,
is not, having to correct this humongous thing. You are working on it in tiny ways, and you build a foundation of trust where you can, address it in, small bites instead of having to take the whole thing all at once, right?
yeah.
But but I love the practice. Boy, that is a really good habit to get into is practicing this conversation for you.
I love that you said they get easier, not to confuse this with being any more enjoyable because that's not true, but they do get easier. But Hugo, one area where I've struggled in my leadership journey is how to engage the rest of the team when they are feeling the impact of someone's performance or other issues going on. And that feeling of unease that a team may have when there are letdowns from one person or multiple issues going on within a team, right? Like sometimes you show up as a leader and you need to reorg, you need to restructure because you maybe have people not in the right seats for the job that needs to be done, or the mission has changed. And I know in one case, thanks to having a platform of trust, I received some feedback that there were people on my team not comfortable with multiple things that were happening. And I had to figure out how to communicate what I could with the team while honoring the confidentiality of personnel issues. And so my takeaway message was these conversations with employees are never a surprise, because if there are performance issues, we know that feedback is coming, right? Laying that culture of here's how I am going to engage with my team. And if there are any other issues, then the employee also is not surprised because they know what the context is. So, um, trying to disarm the rest of the team and build them back up in a way that doesn't make them walk on eggshells. Does that make sense to you, Hugo? What?
It totally does. And I think it goes back to that, uh, fearless workplace or, psychological safety. If you are having regular conversations, both individually and with the team as a whole, um, there's an expectation that you are addressing it, right? And you can, like you said, without violating the trust and the confidentiality of the content of that conversation, there are places and ways you can say we're working on that. We
Yeah,
recognize that there are uh, there are issues, and we're dealing with it. Right? And you're just going to have to trust me that this is in process. You might even in the course of that conversation with the individual say, are there ways that I can help hold you accountable, that the team can help support you? And that
yeah,
way you might be able to bring the team in on this. Either
right,
say, Jen is struggling with some stuff. She's asked if we could help point out when she, misses a deadline, or what I mean. Like, you have to
right.
find a way that you can bring everybody into that constructive, supportive way of addressing this. One of the challenges that I think comes up regularly for leaders is when two members of the team have um, beef, for
Yes,
want of a better term.
yes,
And you may inherit this, right? You come in to an office as a new leader, and already there are two people who are glaring at each other across the office space, and this is something that you now have to deal with, right? Um, First, I would say don't take any action until you have a good sense. You've talked to both people and you understand where the beef is coming from. Falling into that solid coaching practice of asking open-ended questions and asking them for feedback and understanding their perspective, right? You may not be able to fix two people's beef. It just may be beyond your ability. But communicating your expectations about how we treat each other in the workplace,
yeah,
understanding where that beef comes from, there may be space for you to alleviate some of that pressure, let some of that bleed off, right? In an ideal situation, you have, it wasn't pre-existing. You've come into an office, and in the course of doing your one-on-ones, you start to see that there, might be two people rubbing each other the wrong way. You can start to address that when it's still a small issue, before it
right.
becomes, throwing the stapler at each other across the office. In which case, again, that's where that trust, and that's where being able to say, I want to work with both of you on this. You are
Yeah.
two valued employees. You both have legitimate concerns. Let's figure out, how do we work together? What's going on? Maybe you bring them both into a conversation. These are,
100%.
yeah,
Yeah.
like, let's figure out how we're going to be able to work well together, because we spend half of our waking life in the office. It should be a place where you feel comfortable doing your best work, where you feel supported, where you have positive relations, right? So addressing that individually and together, don't ignore it, is I think what I'm really saying. Like, it will
Don't
never
know.
get better on its own. You may find it hard, but for the good of the team as a whole, figuring out a way to address it, to let the steam off, to start to heal some of that animosity, is going to pay huge dividends for the rest of the team, because they're feeling it.
They are feeling it. And these issues do not get better with time.
They do.
So, avoiding the conversation just has the negative ripple. And then, it may get to the point then where now you're talking termination instead of how can we help address the issue.
Right?
So, with that, with that, Hugo, as we go to wrap up, any closing thoughts that you have for today?
Let me just underline what you just said. These conversations are really necessary. None of this is going to get better by itself, right? And leaving it go only makes it worse, and it starts to infect your whole team. So start
Yeah.
early by building trust. If and when you're able to do that, then you can start to address these things in smaller increments as opposed to waiting until it becomes a big earth-shattering incident. But don't shirk your responsibility. This is one of the most important things you're going to do as a leader. And with practice, you will get good at it. As you said, it might get easier. It never gets pleasant. But boy, as you want to help raise your team up to the next level, this is a skill that will be invaluable to you as a leader.
And one thing I thought of just now that I should have mentioned earlier, want to mention now, is not sandwiching the negative between the positives. I know there's the old sandwich style, right? Positive, negative, positive. I have found no, addressing the specific issue head on is a very clear message with someone and does not take away from the positives that you actually want to recognize them for. So keeping your message clear, super important so that the team member really trusts what you are offering in that feedback, right? Whether it's positive or opportunity to grow.
Yeah, totally agree.
And so I'm going to put something out there. Hugo, you and I were chatting about this prior. We're going to put a little challenge out to our listeners. If you are struggling in having difficult personnel conversations and would like some live coaching, please let us know. Send a note, reach out to us in the messages below. We will be happy to take a look and bring maybe a couple people on for some live coaching in this area because it is that important. This is one of the most critical things we as leaders can do in terms of creating the ripple effect in our teams at work, in our homes. So we look forward to you sending us that message. And in the meantime, reflect on what personnel challenges, conversations have you been avoiding and why? Where can you start today? Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you, Jen.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Ripple Effect Leadership Podcast. If this episode sparked an insight or reminded you of someone, please share it and help forward the ripple. Don't forget to leave us a rating or review so more leaders can find their way here. You can find us on LinkedIn at Jen Brown-Coach and at HF Rodriguez Jr. and more leadership content and coaching tools at journeyofgracecoaching.com. A quick heads up before you go. This podcast and all content shared by Ripple Effect Leadership is for informational and educational purposes only. The opinions and characterizations in this podcast are our own and do not necessarily represent the U.S. government. This podcast is not a substitute for mental health treatment or professional medical advice. If you are struggling, we encourage you to reach out to a licensed mental health provider or call the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. You don't have to do this alone.